If your last name is on this list, your family did not choose America. They were given a choice between changing their religion and dying, and they ran. In October of 1685, Louis XIV signed the Edict of Fontainebleau, and it cancelled the law that had protected French Protestants for 87 years. It did far more than close their churches. Their pastors were given 2 weeks to leave the country, and their children could be taken and raised Catholic by law. Leaving France was itself made a crime, so a man caught escaping was sent to the galleys for life, and a woman caught escaping was sent to prison for life. They left anyway. Somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 French Protestants got out over the following years, and they carried away the most valuable thing France owned, which was not gold, but skill. These were the silk weavers of Tours and Lyon, the goldsmiths, the watchmakers, the gunsmiths, and the merchants of La Rochelle. England took them in, and so did Holland. The Elector of Brandenburg answered with an edict of his own within days, and 20,000 of them went into Prussia. Out of those countries, over the next 2 generations, they came here. Now here is the part that concerns you. Almost none of these families kept the name the way France had spelled it, because a refugee learns fast that a name nobody can say is a name that costs him work. Rivoire became Revere, Xavier became Sevier, and Delano became Delano. Leblanc was simply translated and became white, and Dubois was translated and became wood. The accents fell off, the silent letters were rewritten the way an English clerk heard them, and within 3 generations, the family was invisible. So this is not a video about what your name means, because meanings are cheap. This is about the road the name travelled and the law that pushed it out of France. 20 surnames counting down. For each one, the family that carried it, the place it came from, and where in America it came ashore. Stay to the end, because the last 4 names run into the first: Chief Justice of the United States, a president's middle name, and the most famous ride in American history. Number 20, the name Faneuil. The Faneuils were merchants of La Rochelle, the great Protestant port on the Atlantic coast. When the revocation came, they got out through Holland and England, and by the 1690s, 2 Faneuil brothers were in New York, in the refugee town of New Rochelle that people from their own city had just founded. One of those brothers, Andrew Faneuil, moved on to Boston and became one of the richest merchants in New England. He never married. He left his whole fortune to his nephew Peter, on one condition written into the will, that Peter never marry either. Peter took the money and the condition. In 1742, he built a market house with a meeting hall above it and gave it to the town of Boston. And that hall is where Samuel Adams argued the colony into revolution. Americans call it the Cradle of Liberty. Peter Faneuil died the following year at 42, and the building still carries the name of a refugee family that Boston has been mispronouncing ever since. Number 19, the name Boudinot. The Boudinots came from Morans, a small town in the marshes north of La Rochelle. After 1685, the family scattered, reached the West Indies, and from there reached New York, where they worked as silversmiths, which was one of the trades the refugees dominated wherever they landed. The 3rd generation in America produced Elias Boudinot, a lawyer in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, and he sits in the middle of the Revolution without ever getting a monument. He was Commissary General of Prisoners, responsible for the American soldiers held in British hands. He was President of the Continental Congress from 1782 to 1783, which means his signature is on the ratification of the treaty that ended the war. Afterwards, Washington made him the first director of the United States Mint. He also took in a penniless teenager who had arrived from the Caribbean with a letter of introduction and nowhere to sleep, and gave him a room. The boy was Alexander Hamilton. Number 18, the name Manigault. Pierre Manigault also came from La Rochelle, and he arrived in Charleston in the 1690s with nothing at all. He kept a tavern and ran a distillery and a cooperage, which is worth saying because the Huguenots in Carolina usually get described as though they all landed rich. They did not. They landed with a trade and no capital. His son Gabriel turned that into the largest private fortune in the colony, and then he spent it. When the Revolution came, Gabriel Manigault lent the state of South Carolina more money than any other private citizen in it, and he never got most of it back. And in 1779, when the British moved on Charleston, he walked out to the lines as a private volunteer with a musket, standing beside his 15-year-old grandson at the age of 75. The grandson of a man who fled France with nothing was defending a city his family had helped build. Number 17. The name Bayard. The Bayards were a Protestant family who got out of France early and settled in Holland, and that is how they ended up tied to the very beginning of New York. Anna Bayard was the sister of Peter Stuyvesant, the last Dutch Director General of New Netherland, and Stuyvesant's own wife was Judith Bayard. When he sailed for New Amsterdam in 1647, his widowed sister and her 3 Bayard sons came with him. Those sons ran the town. Nicholas Bayard became mayor of New York, and in the political knife-fighting after the English takeover, he was convicted of treason, sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered, and reprieved at the last stage. Then the name moved south, and this part is rare in American politics. The Bayards of Delaware held a seat in the United States Senate across 5 generations of one family. James Ashton Bayard was one of the commissioners who negotiated the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, and his grandson, Thomas Francis Bayard, became Secretary of State. Number 16. The name DeLancey. Etienne DeLancey was born in Caen in 1663, and he was 22 when the revocation came, so his mother handed him the family jewels and sent him out of the country. He sold them in England, reached New York in 1686 with the proceeds, anglicized his first name to Stephen, and turned that small stake into one of the great fortunes of colonial America. The house he built on Pearl Street in 1719 is still standing. It was sold and it became a tavern, and the tavern keeper's name was Samuel Fraunces. Fraunces Tavern, where George Washington said goodbye to his officers, is a Huguenot merchant's front parlor. The DeLanceys themselves chose the other side. They were the leading Loyalist family in New York. They raised a Loyalist brigade, and when the war ended, their land was confiscated and sold off in lots. If you have ever walked down DeLancey Street on the Lower East Side, you were walking across a Huguenot family's confiscated farm, laid out in a grid by the men who beat them. Number 15. The name Huger. This one you have probably seen written down and never once said correctly. Huger is pronounced UG, with the weight on the second half, and if you say it the way it looks in South Carolina, everyone in the room will know you are not from there. Daniel Huger fled France after the revocation and reached Carolina, and his family became one of the great names of the Low Country. On the night of the 13th of June, 1777, a 19-year-old French marquis came ashore in the dark at North Island near Georgetown, having sailed from Spain to join a war that was not his. The first American house he slept in belonged to Benjamin Huger. That marquis was Lafayette. Benjamin Huger was killed 2 years later outside Charleston, shot by his own side in the dark. And then the story doubles back on itself. When Lafayette was locked in an Austrian fortress at Olmütz in the 1790s, the young man who rode in and tried to break him out of it, and went to prison himself for trying, was Francis Kinloch Huguet, the son of the man who had given him a bed. Number 14. The name Gano. The Ganos are the correction to the neat version of this story because the French Protestant exodus did not begin in 1685. It ran for more than a century before that. The Gano family, written as Gano or Gernot in France, got out in the earlier Terror, escaped to the island of Guernsey, and crossed to America generations before Louis XIV signed anything at all. Their most famous son was John Gano, born in New Jersey in 1727, a Baptist minister at a time when Baptists in America were a persecuted minority themselves. He served the whole revolution as a brigade chaplain and would not stay behind the lines, which is how he got the name the Fighting Chaplain. Afterwards, he rebuilt his scattered New York congregation and went west to plant churches across Kentucky. There is a family tradition that he baptized George Washington in the Potomac. It is disputed, and I am telling you that rather than selling it to you. What is not disputed is that the Gano name spread through Ohio and Kentucky, and that it started out French. That is 7 of 20. If you are getting something out of this, subscribe, because this channel is working through every people that came here and every road they came by, and the next list is already being written. The 13 names still ahead are the ones most likely to be sitting in your own family tree. Number 13. The name Dupuy. Bartholomew Dupuy was, by his family's account, a soldier in the guard of Louis XIV, so when the revocation came, he had to choose between the king he served and the church he belonged to. The escape story that came down with the family is dramatic, and I will call it what it is, a family tradition. What the records do show is the destination. Dupuy went to Germany, then to England, and in 1700 he was on a ship to Virginia. That ship was part of something larger. In 1700, around 700 French Protestant refugees were landed in Virginia and settled 20 miles above the falls of the James River, on the site of an abandoned Monacan village, and they called the place Manigault Town. The English government paid their passage, mostly because a line of armed Protestant farmers between the plantations and the frontier was useful to have. The surnames went inland with the frontier, and Dupuy is now spread across Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi, spelled Dupuy, 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 and Dupuy. Number 12. The name Michaux. Michaux is the other great Manigault town name, and one of the best documented of the Virginia Huguenot lines. Abraham Michaux came out of Sedan, in the northeast of France, which had been one of the strongest Protestant towns in the kingdom. He escaped to Holland and then to Virginia and settled on the James. Michaux descendants went west out of Virginia into Kentucky and Tennessee. Now listen for the name in disguise, because in the mountains it was written the way it sounded, so Michaux turns into Michaux, Michaux, and Michaux in American records, and there are families carrying those spellings today with no idea where they came from. Number 11. The name Maury. The Maoris came from Castel Moron in the southwest and fled first to Ireland before the family reached Virginia in the 1720s. This name walks into the middle of American history twice. The Reverend James Maury ran a classical school in Louisa County, and one of the boys who boarded there and learned his Latin from him was Thomas Jefferson. Then, in 1763, Maury sued for his unpaid salary in a case remembered as the Parsons Cause. The young country lawyer who stood against him told the jury that a king who overturned a colony's own law was no longer entitled to obedience. Maury won the case and was awarded 1 penny. The lawyer was Patrick Henry, and that afternoon made him. The same line later produced Matthew Fontaine Maury, who charted the ocean's winds and currents and was called the Pathfinder of the Seas. Number 10. The name Demarest. David Demarest came from Bouchon in Picardy, and his road out is the standard refugee route in miniature: France to Middelburg in Holland, Holland to Mannheim in Germany, and Mannheim to New Amsterdam in 1663. Then he did something the others mostly did not. In June of 1677, he bought roughly 6,000 acres directly from the Hackensack and Tappan people, and it became known as the French Patent. He built a French-speaking Protestant settlement on it, with its own church, deliberately apart from the Dutch, so that his grandchildren would still be able to pray in French. It worked for about 60 years, and then the language went, as it always did, but the name did not. Bergen County has a town called Demarest, and the branch that went west spelled it Demarest in Kentucky. If your family says they are Dutch and the name is Demarest, they are half right about the route and wrong about the country. Number 9. The name Lefevre. This is the name that hides in plain sight because Lefevre means the smith. The French Lefevre, the German Schmidt, and the English smith are the same word for the same job in 3 languages. That is how a great many French families disappeared into an English-speaking country without changing a letter of what they were. The Lefevres belonged to New Paltz in the Hudson Valley. In 1677, 12 refugee families bought land from the Esopus people on the Wallkill River, called themselves the Douzaine, and built stone houses along one street. Huguenot Street in New Paltz still has original stone houses from the 1680s standing on it, which makes it one of the oldest continuously inhabited streets in the United States. The family carries a story that their ancestor escaped as a boy, hiding a Bible that had belonged to his grandfather, and that Bible is on display today. The name itself now travels as Lefevre, 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 and simply Fever. Number 8. The name Lamoreaux. Lamoreaux means the one in love, which is an unusual thing to find on a mailbox in upstate New York. In 1688, refugees from La Rochelle bought land in Westchester County from John Pell and founded a town, and because they could not go home, they named it after the home they had lost, New Rochelle. The first years there were brutally poor, and the story that survives is that the settlers walked the 20-odd miles down to the French church in Manhattan, carrying their shoes in their hands to keep them from wearing out. That story may have grown in the telling, but the poverty behind it did not. André Lamoreaux and his wife Suzanne sailed from Bristol and reached New York around the year 1700, and their descendants spread up the Hudson into Putnam and Orange counties. The spelling was never stable. Lamoreaux, 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 and Lamoreaux are all the same family, arguing with the same clerk. Number 7. The name Dubois. Louis Dubois was born near Lille in 1626 and came to the Esopus country of New York, and his name is attached to one of the hardest stories in the early Hudson Valley. In 1663, his wife and children were carried off in a raid on the settlement at Wiltwyck, and Dubois rode with the party that went after them and brought them back. He later became one of the 12 patentees of New Paltz. Now the important part, and it reaches far beyond one family. Dubois means of the wood, and when an English-speaking clerk met that name, he had 2 options, and both of them happened. Sometimes he wrote it down as it sounded, which is why half of America says the name Dubois, and sometimes he simply translated it, which is why there are wood families in the Hudson Valley whose great-great-grandfather signed himself Dubois. The scholar W.E.B. Dubois got that surname from a white great-grandfather of French Protestant descent from Poughkeepsie. Number 6. The name Ravenel. René Ravenel came from Vitré in Brittany and reached South Carolina in the mid-1680s in the first wave into the Low Country, and those refugees did not settle in Charleston alone. They took up land along the Cooper and the Santee, and the stretch they farmed was called French Santee for 200 years afterwards. What they did with that land changed the colony. These were people out of a wine and silk country who arrived in a subtropical swamp, and they worked out how to make it produce, first with rice and later with indigo, and the Huguenot families of the Low Country grew rich on it. That wealth is inseparable from slavery, and an honest telling of the Carolina story has to say so out loud rather than walk around it. The name never left. There is a town called Ravenel, and the 8-lane bridge that carries you across the Cooper River into Charleston is the Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge. Number 5. The name Marion. Benjamin Marion and his wife Judith left France after the Revocation and settled on the Cooper River. Their grandson was born in Berkeley County around 1732, and he was so small and sickly as a child that the family did not expect him to live. That was Francis Marion. When Charleston fell in 1780 and the Southern Army was destroyed at Camden, the revolution in South Carolina was finished on paper. Marion kept it alive from the swamps with a few dozen unpaid men on their own horses, striking supply columns and vanishing back into ground the British cavalry could not follow. The nickname came from the other side. Bannister Tarleton is said to have given up a long chase through the ox swamp with a curse about the devil himself not being able to catch the old fox. Whether he said those exact words is a story, but the pursuit was real. There are counties and towns named Marion in more than 20 states, and every one of them is named for a French refugee's grandson. Number 4. The name Sevier. Here is a surname that most Americans would swear is English, and it is not, because underneath it is Xavier. The family carried the tradition that they were Huguenots who fled France for London and rewrote the name the way the English said it. And Sevier is what came out the other side. Valentine Sevier reached Virginia by about 1740 and moved into the Shenandoah Valley, and his son John went over the mountains into the country that was not yet Tennessee. He led the frontier militia at Kings Mountain in 1780, which broke the British hold on the southern backcountry. He then served as governor of the state of Franklin, a breakaway republic the United States refused to recognize. When Tennessee finally became a state in 1796, John Sevier was elected its first governor, and he held that office for 6 terms and 12 years. Sevier County is named for him, and so is its seat, Sevierville, where Dolly Parton is from. The French spelling did not survive on the map, but the French family did. Number 3. The name Delano. Philippe de Lannoy was born in Leiden in 1602, and his parents were French-speaking Protestants out of Lille, which is in France today. They were part of the same religious flight one generation early, running from a Catholic king in the Spanish Netherlands instead of one in Paris. At 19, he crossed to England and took a ship called the Fortune to the Plymouth colony, arriving in November of 1621, 1 year after the Mayflower. The Fortune's passengers came ashore with almost no provisions, and the colony had to halve its own rations to feed them through the winter. The English clerks in Plymouth wrote his name down the way it hit their ears, and Delanoy became Delano within a single generation. 280 years later, a boy was baptized Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he knew exactly where that middle name had come from. Number 2. The name J. Pierre J was a merchant of La Rochelle, and what happened to him is the revocation in one household. His church was pulled down, and he was arrested, and soldiers were quartered in his house to break him, which was the standard method and had a name of its own, the Dragonards. His son Augustus was at sea when it happened and could not come home, because coming home would have meant a galley bench. So Augustus J went to America instead. He tried Charleston, settled in New York, and married Anna Maria Bayard, which means 2 of the names on this list were joined in a single marriage in colonial Manhattan. Their grandson was John J. He wrote part of the Federalist Papers. He negotiated the peace treaty that recognized the United States as a country in 1783, and he became the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. As governor of New York, he signed the law in 1799 that began the ending of slavery in that state. The first man to sit at the head of the American judiciary was 2 generations from a man who lost his house for being the wrong kind of Christian. Number 1. The name Revere. Apollos Rivoire was born near Bordeaux, and he was about 13 years old when his family put him on a boat. His people had already lost the fight, and they knew what was coming for their children, so they sent a boy of 13 through Guernsey to Boston alone rather than let the state have him. In Boston, he was apprenticed to a goldsmith named John Coney, learned the trade, and changed his name to Paul Revere. The family's own explanation for the change was written down, and it is beautifully unromantic. It was done so the bumpkins could pronounce it easier. His son, the second Paul Revere, was the silversmith, the engraver whose print of the Boston Massacre carried the story into every colony, and the rider who went out of Boston on the night of the 18th of April, 1775. Afterwards, he built the first successful copper rolling mill in the United States, and his copper went onto the hull of the frigate Constitution and the dome of the Massachusetts State House. Think about what that actually means. The most famous ride in American history was made by the son of a French refugee child, sent across an ocean alone because a king in Versailles had decided that his family's religion was illegal. That is the pattern underneath every name on this list. The Huguenots are the one great American immigration that vanished on purpose. They had no country to be homesick for, because France had thrown them out and would have jailed them if they went back. So they married into the Dutch and the English, dropped the language, let the spelling go, and became invisible faster than any group that ever came. Which means the evidence sits in the shape of the name rather than the sound of it. Look above all for a surname that is a translation, because that was the commonest disguise of them all. Leblanc turned into white, and Dubois turned into wood. Leroy turned into king, Lejeune turned into young, Charpentier turned into carpenter, and Boulanger turned into baker. If your name is one of those plain English trade names, and your line runs back to New Rochelle, New Paltz, Bergen County, Mannequin Town, or the Santee, you may not be English at all. And the records are better than most people expect. The Mannequin Town Parish Register survives, the New Paltz deeds survive, and the Charleston French Church kept its own registers. This is one of the few American lines you can genuinely trace back across the ocean. So put your surname in the comments, spelled the way your family spells it, and add the state you are from, because the spelling and the place together say more than either one alone. I read them, and the names that come up most often become the next list. If yours was not on this one, that is not because it is small, it is because 20 is 20, and there are hundreds. Gaillard, Légaré, Poitevin, Priolo, Bonneau, and Guérard all have roads like the ones you heard today. And if your ancestors did come out of France, understand what you inherited from them. They were told to kneel or be destroyed, and they walked out of the richest country in Europe with nothing but a trade in their hands. Everything your family has built here stands on a refusal that happened 340 years ago in a country they never saw again.